Hey guys, Marco the dog trainer here. Today we're going to do a video all about prong collars, and there's going to really be a lot of information in this one, so it might be one of my longer videos. So the first thing I want to go over is, are prong collars safe? The second is going to be, what are prong collars actually supposed to be used for? The third is going to be, what size should we pick for our dog? The fourth is going to be, what types of prong collars are available, like different models. The fifth is going to be how to put a prong collar on our dog. And in that same category, we'll also do how to remove links to make sure it's appropriately sized. And then the sixth category is just going to be general cautions to be aware of if you're trying to use this type of equipment with your pup. So I'm going to put timestamps just so that way if you want to jump ahead to a certain section, feel free to do that. Now, I pretty much exclusively use Herm Sprenger for any type of like metal training equipment. Sometimes I can't find all of these links online, so I end up ordering a lot of this stuff in bulk from Herm Sprenger directly to provide it for my clients. But I will find whatever links are available and I'll add them to the video description, so that way if you're interested in any of this, feel free to check it out. So let's get to it. All right, guys, section 1, are prong collars safe? The short answer is yes and no. Okay, so as a professional dog trainer, I am a huge advocate that if you're going to use any type of training equipment, like a choke chain, prong collar, electronic collar, you need to have the help of a professional and reputable trainer. Okay, there's a lot more going on with this stuff than what it seems. And I really feel that the bulk of our horror stories and bad stigmas and stereotypes that are attached to this type of equipment, the majority of that is rooted in people going to the store and buying this that don't really know what they're doing. So, so that's the first, safety protocol in my opinion. Okay, now the second is going to be based around size, having an appropriate size for our dog, where 95% of the people that I meet that are using prong collars before I start working with them are using prong collars that are too small, where the number of labs, Great Danes, Doberman, German Shepherds that I've seen wearing a prong collar designed for a 5-pound dog is pretty alarming. Now, I think that this mistake is rooted in good intentions, but again, people just don't understand. So the smaller the collar is, okay, it might seem less aggressive because it's small, it's lightweight, it doesn't seem super, bulky. But the smaller the prong itself is, the smaller the point is on the prong. Okay, now not that this is sharp, but it's a lot sharper than the extra large size. Okay, where it's bigger than a paper clip, but just to help you guys imagine it, this is a lot closer to the edge of a paper clip jamming into you, where this one, it might be bigger and heavier and bulkier, and it might catch more bad looks from people that don't like this type of equipment. But because these prongs are giant, the surface area, the circle, is much bigger on the edge of it, and it's much softer. It's like rounded. So, so generally speaking, the bigger the prong collar is that you can get on your dog, the less aggressive it's going to be. Okay, so that's kind of the second safety thing that I see a lot of people making mistakes with. Okay, now the next thing is going to be, what do we have the prong collar attached to? So for the most part, I'm going to have a prong collar hooked up to like a 6-foot leash. Or if we're doing more of like an off-leash type training, we're going to be using like a 50-foot long training leash. Now, one area you definitely want to be extra careful, and there's even an argument to be said you shouldn't be doing it at all, is having a prong collar attached to a retractable leash. Now, there might be some one-off training applications with a trainer that, may be coming when called or some kind of advanced concept. But your average person with their dog, if your dog is sprinting 25 feet and they hit the end of the leash with a prong collar, it's probably not going to be great for them. So that's why I would say for the average person, the retractable leash is already kind of a no-no in itself for a lot of people. But especially with the prong collar, it's a combination that can be kind of dangerous. So now the last point that I'll make about safety is going to help segue us into the next section, okay, which is again, like people's limited understanding of what this stuff is actually for. So most people that I meet that are using this kind of stuff, they usually tell me, well, my dog's big and I need it because they're big and I need to be able to control them. Other people will tell me, well, my dog pulls and this is the only way that I can control them when they're pulling. Other people tell me, well, I've got a German Shepherd, I've got a Doberman, I've got a Rottweiler, I need a prong collar. So all of those things, they're kind of misunderstood. That, the way that I use this stuff, we're going to talk about in the next section, but generally speaking, a prong collar is for a dog that is already trained, already knows not to pull on the leash. And then we use the prong collar to transition into off-leash training or other advanced training. So just because you have a German Shepherd, that doesn't automatically mean you need a prong collar. Just because your dog is strong, that doesn't mean you should be using a prong collar. A lot of times it might make it easier to manage a dog that's pulling, but that's not what it's designed for. So as a professional, that's why, like, I usually tell people prong collars are more transitional for the most part. We use them temporarily to get our dogs into more advanced training. So we will talk more about that in the next section. Okay, guys, section 2. What are prong collars used for? And again, this is at least based on my experience and how I was taught and how I teach my clients. So first, I have to kind of explain that with my training technique, we are really, really big on helping our owners understand that the leash is our number one tool when it comes to communicating with our dogs. Dogs are instinctively really good at recognizing what a leash is communicating. The problem is that most people just don't know how to communicate through their leash. So in some way, shape, or form, a prong collar is essentially a magnifier. It magnifies the language of what we're communicating through the leash. Now, that can be really helpful because, like I said earlier in this video, as you start practicing off leash, that usually starts, with a long, thin leash to kind of pretend like we're off leash, or just to open up the concept of listening from 20, 30, 40 feet away. Is that when you're that far away from a dog and you're trying to pull down on that long leash to get them to follow whatever direction, there's a lot of room for that message to get muddy and confusing. Where the prong collar, again, it magnifies what the leash is communicating. So if we're lightly pulling down or pulling in a certain direction, our dogs will understand what we're trying to get them to do. Now, again, that is a pretty broad, probably oversimplification, but I'm just trying to open your eyes to, some of the concepts that we use this for. Now, in that same ballpark, another name people will call these are pinch collars. That basically what ends up happening is that anytime that the leash is overly tight, the prongs start to pinch together. And it's supposed to simulate kind of like mom nipping them at the neck, kind of. But essentially, it's not comfortable to resist a tight leash. So it can be a tool that we can kind of gently use to help our dogs connect that they should be following the leash and what the leash is, the direction it's pulling or whatever direction we're trying to give. It'll help the dogs connect. It's more comfortable to move with it than it is to fight against it. So now the other areas that you'll see this stuff being used a little bit more indefinitely is going to be for like advanced training. So people that are doing maybe scent work or retrieval, protection, agility, utility type things, working dogs, where dogs that are doing more of a continued education, or have some type of job that they're actually responsible for, you might see this equipment on, a little more of the time. But like I said, average dog, I'm using this for a couple weeks to kind of transition into the next phase, and then we're done with it. And now one other thing, again, is that there are some dogs that I skip the prong collar with. They just don't need it. We're able to move into the off-leash step without using a prong collar. So again, there's a little bit of gray area to this stuff, and that's why I ultimately recommend that you're finding a trainer to help you with it. But those are just some of the applications that I'd be using a prong collar for. All right, guys, section 3. What size prong collar should I be using for my dog? So there are other sizes out there, but as time has went on, I found myself just gravitating to these 3 sizes. Now, I'm not going to get into like all of the individual measurements because that stuff can kind of get confusing. Sometimes it's like the same exact collar, it just came with an extra 5 links, so it's a longer collar. Sometimes it's the same collar, but the size of the chain itself is smaller, or the size of where the leash connects was smaller. So we're not going to get into every little dimension of them. What I'm going to do is in the video description, I'm going to put small, medium, large, and I'll just put the corresponding links to the ones that I typically use. Okay, now there's going to be a little bit of gray area here. There is kind of this sense of kind of feel or instinct for me on like what size I'm going to use for a particular dog, but I'm going to try to give you just some vague weight and size guidelines. So for our small, maybe we'll say up to about 10 pounds or so. The medium can cover a pretty wide range. Maybe we'll say roughly 10 to 15 pounds up to maybe 40, 45 pounds. And then the large, we'll say maybe 40, 45 pounds and up. Now, that's at least generally where I would start with it. But there have been times that I've had a smaller dog that just happened to have a kind of shape that I could remove, all of the links except for 4 on here. And it fit pretty well on a small dog. So I'm always thinking, what is the biggest collar I could get on this dog reasonably and comfortably? If it just feels ridiculous on them and it's just giant and heavy, then you may want to go down a size. Okay, so that's at least the best I can do to push you in at least a starting point for size. Now, the other thing we want to talk about is like the amount of links that I'll show you guys later in this video, how to remove them and replace them. But generally speaking, we don't want the collar so tight that there's no wiggle room at all, that it's just constantly taut around our dog's neck. But on the other end of that, you don't want it so loose that it's hanging down, and that way, it slams up into their neck. So you kind of want like a loose fitting collar that, doesn't seem like a necklace. It's kind of fits the shape of their neck. Okay, now sometimes dogs will be in between. So it's like you remove all the links, but now it's too small. You add in a link and now it's too big. So there is also room, and again, I'll show you guys later in this video, that you can kind of adjust it to make it fit a little bit better if your dog's kind of in between sizes. But for the most part, the majority of the time, the collars come with more links than what you're going to need. So the bulk of my clients are probably going to be removing links, not adding more in. Okay, so that's probably everything that I can give you guys as far as sizing is concerned. Why don't we jump over to section 4, where we'll talk more about the different types of prong collars that are available. All right, guys, section 4. We're going to really quickly talk about two different models of prong collars, and then I'll talk about some kind of offshoots from there. So the first model that I prefer is usually harder to come by, which we'll call quick release, I believe is what it's called. So with this model, if you squeeze the clasp, it undoes the collar. And that's how essentially you take it off and put it back on. You wrap it around, and I'll show you guys later in this video, step by step how to do this. Okay, now that is the one that I prefer. Like I said, they're harder to come by. They tend to be more expensive because of that. And that's why I end up buying them in bulk directly from Herm Sprenger for my clients. Now, the second model, it really works just as well. There's just some convenience things I don't like about it. So the second model doesn't have a quick release on it. So I guess we'll just call this like the original. I don't know what I would call this in variation, but for our purposes, we'll call it the original model. Okay, so the original model, there's no way to undo it. So anytime you're going to take it off your dog or put it back on, you have to take one of the prongs and squeeze it and pop it off. And then again, to put it back on, you wrap it around and you got to pop it back into place. Now, a couple reasons why I don't like that. One, I've got a lot of clients that complain they don't have the finger or hand strength to pop the links on and off. Now, the other thing that I don't like about it is if our dog is wiggling around and you're trying to squeeze this thing and get it in to put it on, it can be pretty difficult. And then the last thing is that if we're popping this thing on and off every single time we're putting the collar on or taking it off, I worry about it wearing out the prong to a point that the prong can kind of pop out on its own. So I worry about the wear and tear of doing that. And then I've also had clients that are just being lazy. And instead of taking the prongs out, they're just trying to slide this over their dog's head. And I don't like that. One, that probably means the collar's too big. And then two, I don't like the idea of these prongs being anywhere near a dog's eyes, okay? So again, it works just as well, but from a convenience standpoint, I really don't like it. Okay, now, then from there, like as far as Herm Sprenger is concerned, like the brand that I like, these ones I believe are all like nickel coated or something like that. Now there's a very, very small fraction of dogs out there that can be allergic to this type of metal. I've maybe seen 1 out of 800 dogs that I've worked with that was allergic to the prong collar or the training collar. So it's not super frequent, but there is another prong collar available that I'm not even sure how it's pronounced. I believe it's called Kurrigan, and it looks more of like a reddish gold. And I think the main idea behind that one is that it works better for dogs that have allergies to this type of stuff. And the only limitation to that one is that I don't think it comes with a quick release. I think you have to get it with the more original model. And then the last type of prong collar I've seen, I don't really like them. If I'm not mistaken, I think they're called neck techs. And they're kind of like a different version of a prong collar that it looks like flat plates that you wouldn't even know it's a prong collar. And on the inside of it, it's got these sharp, pointy little points. So it's kind of like a secret prong collar. And I'm not really a big fan of those. Like, I understand that a lot of people don't like this equipment and it makes them nervous and they don't agree with it. But when you move into that neck tech, it's a pretty advanced collar. And if you are not well trained on how to be sensitive with it, it can really be overly aggressive. So that's why I'm not a huge fan of that particular model. Now, again, there are other companies that have different models of this kind of stuff that might be kind of like a hybrid of a little bit of like a nylon strap that has got some prongs in it. I've seen some prongs with rubber tips on them. I don't really like any of that stuff because for the most part, out of all the different brands that I've used, I really find these to be the most reliable. Okay, so that's probably everything I can tell you about the different types. Why don't we move on to section 5? Okay, guys, for section 5, we're going to go over how to take this off, how to put this on, and how to add and remove links. Okay, so I would recommend that we start with our collar kind of oriented this way, just so you can kind of make sense of where the different pieces are. We've got our center plate in the middle. We've got our spacing ring here, which is the circle. And then we've got the D ring up top where our leash hooks up to. And then we have our clasp here. Okay. So now to take this off, all we're going to do is squeeze this clasp, and that should basically undo it. And then we can take the whole thing off. Okay. Now, if we were going to put this back on, the first piece that you need is the plate that is at the end of the collar that does not already have the chain going through it. Okay, so this plate here already has a chain through it, so that's not the one we're looking for. We're looking for this one. Okay, now the next piece you need is the end of the chain. So you're going to wrap this all the way around your dog's neck. The end of the chain goes through the end of the plate, and then we're going to close that off with the clasp on the end of the chain. Again, just to orient this, okay, there we go. So now again, we've got the center plate, the spacing ring in the middle, D ring up top for the leash. Okay, now if we wanted to size this a little bit more exact, like I had told you earlier in this video, sometimes like if you add a link, it's a little too big. If you take it out, it's a little too small. So assuming that your link, when you add the link in, it's just a little too big, instead of hooking the clasp onto the end of the chain, you can hook it onto another link, just making it a little bit smaller. Okay, and I hope that's visible for you guys to see. Okay. Now, as far as the layout goes, you should always see this kind of triangle here. That's just going to help the collar snap and release the way that it's supposed to. Now, adding and removing links. Okay, so I usually tell people, be aware that the two links on the end that connect to our plates, these are called the master links, and they are a different shape than the rest of the links. You can see that it's got this kind of like rectangular edge that helps it hold on to the plate, where the rest of them have a little bit of a different shape. Okay, things can get pretty confusing if you remove the links that are connected to the plates. So generally speaking, I tell people, try not to mess around too much with these links, okay? This one here, this one here. Now, these two links that connect to the center plate, even though they are the same as the rest of these links, it's very difficult to get the links in and out of this plate. So again, I would stay away from that if you can. So now from a side angle here, okay, if I can avoid it, I'm not going to pull this one, not going to pull this one, but the three in the middle, those are fair game. So now if I wanted to take out the middle one, just pull this up a little bit, and if you squeeze that prong together, that's what makes it easier to pull off. Okay, now if I were going to take that link out, I'm going to do the same thing. I pull it down a little bit so I can squeeze this. And again, it can be a little difficult at times. Squeeze, pop off. Okay, so now we've got the link off. If I wanted to hook it back on, I just have to make sure this didn't get all spun up or something like that. Okay, so make sure it still looks clean. I'm going to squeeze this to put it back on. Now, if you're going to remove multiple links, I try to make it as even as possible from the center plate. So if I were going to take off two, maybe I take off one on this side, one on this side. And sometimes it still ends up not entirely balanced, but just try to make it as close as you can. Now, if you were going to replace any of these links, again, just be aware this link is different than the rest of them. So just make sure that you're buying the appropriate link. Okay, now why don't we jump over to section 6? Okay, guys, section 6, general things to be aware of and be cautious of. So first thing is that I should point out that if you have a dog with lighter fur, white fur, sometimes these collars can kind of stain a little bit. That, like, I don't know if it's the oil on them, if there's like an oil, or if it's just the, you know, the metal kind of starting to come off a little bit as the friction of these rubbing. But dogs that have like light fur, a lot of times you'll start to see almost like a grayness, like their hair turns kind of gray or dark. So if you're, I'm not super worried about my dog's aesthetic to that degree, but if you're somebody that is worried about that, um, you could either switch to the hypoallergenic one, like the Kurigan one. They do also have what we call neck protectors that are basically like a neck gaiter that you would see for a person. That it's just like a thin piece of fabric that wraps around their neck. And that can be a good barrier between the prong collar and the neck itself. That also works well for like short-haired dogs that have got thin, sensitive skin, like maybe boxers or pit bulls or things more like that. Okay, so we'll say staining and neck sensitivity. Okay, so just be aware of that. Now, the second thing that we want to talk about is these collars falling off of dogs. Okay, and there's a couple different ways that that could happen. Okay, so sometimes and this doesn't happen super often, but it's just something to be aware of, is that I've had dogs that were wearing a prong collar, and I don't know if they bumped into something or something like that, but they ended up bending one of the prongs. And because the prong was bent, it was very easy for it to pop off on its own. So I kind of make a habit of just routinely looking over the prongs to make sure that they're not like obviously bent out of place. And sometimes you can take pliers and bend them back. And then sometimes you have to just buy a new link altogether. Like I said earlier in the video in section 5, there are 2 different types of links. So if you're buying a replacement link, just make sure you're getting the right one. Now, the other area that I'll see these pop off is, again, not super frequent, but one of my dogs that I've described as Houdini in other videos is incredible at getting out of restraints in crates. So he learned very quickly that if he bites the clasp, this comes undone. So if that's something that is reoccurring, that may be a dog that is a little bit of a better fit for the one that does not have the quick release. Now, I a lot of times have that problem with smaller dogs, just the way that these collars fit on them. The clasp just happens to be closer to their mouth a lot of the times. Now, another kind of like safety concern just to think about is, again, every dog's a little different. So like sometimes with smaller dogs, when they're wearing this, I've seen them put their front arm through here and it's kind of like stuck under their armpit. So that's something you definitely want to be careful of as well. Just good things to be aware of. Now, the last thing, I guess there's 2 things I'll say. The one of the last things we'll say is, like I told you guys earlier in this video, that prong collars essentially are magnifiers. So in a lot of ways, less is more. So I've got some clients that they don't mean to be this way, but they're being way too rough with the leash. And a combination of them being kind of forceful with the leash and the collar magnifying it, they're kind of overdoing it and being a little more aggressive with their dog than what they mean. So I generally tell people, like, especially if you have a sensitive type temperament, more think about handling the leash with your fingertips in a lot of situations as opposed to like a full fist. Okay, now I'm not saying that's every time, but just, less is more, we'll say. Okay, now the last thing that we should probably talk about is aggression. So there's lots of dogs out there that I kind of describe it to my clients as you wouldn't know there's a aggression, like traditional aggression there, but it's under the hood. Like if they were put in the right situation, that aggression will come out. So there are some dogs that you put a prong collar on them, and they do not like the feeling of being restrained. So it kind of brings that aggression to the surface. So again, it's not every dog, just here and there, I might find a dog that's kind of like that. So just be aware of that. If you feel like you put this collar on your dog and they're getting feisty, I hope you're already following my advice that you're using a professional trainer to help you through this process, but that is something that you definitely want to keep in mind. Okay, so that is pretty much everything I could think of to cram into this really long video for you guys. I hope it was helpful. As always, thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next video.